These days the question isn't whether you are a Kickstarter phone at all, but whether or not you are the best. I'm Mark Burstein over Techno Buffalo, and this is the Ubik Uno. The Ubik Uno was reviewed over a period of 7 days. The team who sent it over, the Ubik team obviously, they made it very clear that what we're using is a pre-production sample. It is hand-built, and it is not totally representative of the completed product. Any hardware issues that we see here are supposed to be resolved by the time the production spins up, but I just wanted to let you guys know this is indeed a hand-built pre-pro device. The Ubik Uno is an interesting device. The team behind it has a ton of experience working at major OEMs, so this definitely isn't their first rodeo. The device has a distinct look to it with its kind of non-existent bezels on the side and a kind of a taller form factor. It feels sturdy enough in the hand, and it does feel a little bit premium with its metal frame and chamfered edges on both sides. The back is a plastic non-removable panel with a radial texture on it that gives it some kind of nice grip. You can kind of hear it there too. I wouldn't use the word nice to describe how the phone actually feels in the hand, but it doesn't feel bad either. It's very utilitarian, feels very sharp. The corners are kind of tough. I don't know. Something about it just feels a little bit blocky. All right, let's talk about some specs. Inside this thing, we're looking at a MediaTek processor. We'll talk more about that in a little while, but in the meantime, it's an octa-core MT6795 clocked to 2.2 gigahertz with 3 gigs of RAM, a 20 megapixel Sony camera with 6 different lenses on the inside, and 16 gigs of onboard storage that of course is expandable by that 64 gig slot on the side. The rest of the hardware is just kind of there. The buttons on the side are identical, and they're difficult to tell apart when you're looking at them, though when you're holding it, it's not that big of a deal. The U logo on the chin seems like it ought to be a button, but it's not. The speakers are on the back, and they get kind of tinny at higher volumes, but they're serviceable otherwise. And here on the left side is where you're going to find your SIM slot on the bottom, along with your micro SD slot on the top. The 5.5-inch display is strong. It's got decent color reproduction. The color temperature is a little bit off for me, and I wish the colors were a little bit more saturated, but the blacks are rich, and the sharpness is about where you would expect it to be at 400 dpi. Where it does take a bit of a dip is the responsiveness of the touch panel. It definitely feels like the touch panel here is subpar, and I haven't felt that way in a pretty long time when it comes to mobile devices. Check out this comparison that I did between the Galaxy Note 5, the newest, latest, and greatest, and the Ubik Uno. You can see the Uno has a pretty hard time maintaining a consistent touch response, and it really does come through on the day-to-day. One of the other marquee features of the Uno is the camera, and on paper this Sony sensor is packing quite a wallop. It should snap some of the best photos you can get on a mobile device, but in practice it really does still need a lot of work. The camera is totally unable to focus on anything close up, period, end of story, whether you're in Instagram, the actual camera app on the phone, or the Google camera app. The 120 frames per second video doesn't quite work just yet either, and it really just results in a choppy melee of visual and audio. The software on the camera side, though, is totally easy enough to use, and it does offer a lot of options for those of you who want them. MediaTek gets a really bad rap in these parts of the world, due in part to their refusal to kind of share the source code, which means that custom ROMs and third-party patches aren't something that you should expect to see on the Uno. This is really kind of unfortunate because I do think that MediaTek's doing some good work. They're focusing on multi-core and intelligent cluster management, and it really kind of shows, especially on this little thing. Their work on heterogeneous multi-processing is the same kind of tech that Samsung is working towards with their Exynos chipsets. So if you feel one way about Samsung and you use the Exynos chipsets anyway, you should be not really all that upset about using a MediaTek processor. Performance in my experience was pretty excellent. Aside from the obvious issue of touch panel unresponsiveness, the Uno was always ready for me to throw something at it. The benchmarks don't look great compared to similarly costed cohorts, but I never had any issues with performance. Animations were smooth, apps were responsive. There were spots where other devices would lag, especially other ones that I've used that I didn't experience here. The Uno just didn't bat an eyelash at any of that stuff. I've never used a MediaTek processor before, but I'm actually really pleasantly surprised with the quality that it brought to the table on the Uno. The software here is also totally inoffensive. It's mostly stock Android with a few handful of small tweaks. There are some nice additions like tap to wake and some gestures when the device is asleep, but everything else is entirely stock, and that's a good thing. Stock Android's probably one of the reasons why this thing feels like it runs so smoothly. The battery life was totally fine, not crazy good, but I didn't have any issues with it, though this is probably because I was unable to get any SIM cards working on LTE bands here in California, so hopefully that's something that they get resolved before they hit production. As I said, these are hand-assembled devices. As far as value devices go, we're about to start seeing some seriously heavy hitters in the arena, and if you want to win, you got to bring your A game. The Ubik Uno just doesn't seem to do anything that other manufacturers aren't doing. In its second iteration, Ubik is going to be counting on the community to let them know what features to support and what the design of the device should be like, but for now, it's kind of just another budget device, unfortunately. It's not a bad phone, I'm just not sure it's doing enough to make a name for itself right now. The Ubik comes in at $320 USD, which is certainly at the lower end of the value device range, but I'm struggling to see anything special about it beyond the totally reasonable price. I'm really hoping that next year's entry from Ubik, which will have been fueled by the Ubik community, is a little bit more forward-thinking. Even though this isn't the phone I'd be rushing out to get, I think it's so good for the industry that it exists. There you have it, folks, my thoughts on the successfully kickstarted Ubik Uno. Have any of you guys backed it, or any other kickstarted devices? Is this thing, the Uno, enough to capture your attention? Let me know in the comments what you think, and of course you can whack that like button on the way down. Of course, you can also subscribe if you're interested in our upcoming 6-hour sassy seminar for very sassy folks. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. Be kind to one another, and I will catch you in the next video.